You know, every country has a constitution, right? It's the ultimate document that sets out its powers and its limits. But what about a company? Well, believe it or not, it has one too. So today, we're going to dive into a company's core legal documents, its very own constitution.
So what is it that actually breathes life into a company, making it a real legal entity? What defines everything it can do, and more importantly, everything it can't do? The whole answer is right there in two foundational documents that every single company has to have.
The easiest way to think about it is like this. You've got the Memorandum of Association, or MOA for short. That's the master blueprint. It defines the whole structure, the boundaries, everything. Then you have the Articles of Association, the AOA, and that's the internal rulebook spelling out how to operate within that structure. All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with the big picture, what a company's constitution really is. Then we'll break down the master plan, the MOA, and the internal rulebook, the AOA. After that, we'll get into the juicy stuff. What happens when a company goes rogue and acts beyond its blueprint? We'll also look at this legal balancing act between insiders and outsiders. And finally, we'll see how you can actually change this constitution.
So first things first, it's absolutely crucial to get this. The MOA and AOA aren't just some boring paperwork you file and forget. No way. They are legally required by the Companies Act. Together, they are the very backbone of a company, defining its powers and laying out the complete rulebook for how it's managed.
Let's kick things off with the big one, the Memorandum of Association. You can think of this as the company's charter. It's its public-facing declaration of who it is and why it exists. It is the absolute boundary line.
Now, if you want the formal definition, the Companies Act basically calls the memorandum the foundational document, whether it's the original or one that's been updated. It's the primary contract that lays out the fundamental conditions for the company's very existence. And this is so important because on one hand, it protects shareholders by telling them exactly where their money is supposed to go, and on the other, it protects creditors by clearly defining the scope of the business they're dealing with. So the MOA breaks down a company's whole identity into 5 key parts, all required by law. It starts with the name clause, pretty straightforward. Then the registered office clause, which sets its legal home state. Then we have the object clause, and trust me, this one is the most critical of them all. We'll come back to it. That's followed by the capital clause, which details all the shares and money. And finally, the association clause, which is basically where the founders sign on the dotted line and say, yep, we're forming this company.
This quote from a really famous case just captures the power of the MOA perfectly. It draws a hard line in the sand. Anything beyond that line is something the company legally, fundamentally cannot do. End of story.
Okay, so now let's switch gears to the Articles of Association. If the MOA is the blueprint for the entire house, the AOA are the house rules. They're all about how everyone's supposed to live inside it, governing all the day-to-day stuff.
The articles, as defined in Section 2.5 of the Act, are basically the company's internal regulations. They cover the whole shebang, transferring shares, how to run meetings, appointing directors, how profits get distributed, you name it. They regulate how the big powers defined in the MOA are actually used in practice.
Now, this is a really critical point. There's a clear hierarchy here. The MOA is the boss, period. As we've seen in cases like Guinness versus Land Corporation of Ireland, the articles can never override the memorandum. If a rule in the AOA contradicts the purpose laid out in the MOA, that rule is just, poof, gone. It's legally void. The AOA also have this really unique legal status. The law treats them like a formal contract. This contract binds the company to its members, and interestingly, it binds the members to each other. But, and this is a big but, this contract is strictly an internal affair. It doesn't apply to outsiders. So a third party can't just look at the articles and sue the company to enforce some internal rule. So, what happens when a company just ignores its own master blueprint? When it decides to step outside that hard line drawn by the memorandum? Well, the consequences are severe, and it's all thanks to a very powerful legal idea.
And that idea is called the doctrine of ultra vires. It's Latin for beyond the powers. Any act that falls outside the object clause of the MOA is considered ultra vires. And this isn't just like a minor foul. The law treats it as completely void from the very beginning. The story that really cemented this rule is the famous 1875 case of Ashbury Railway Carriage versus Ritchie. So this company made a contract to finance the construction of a brand new railway line in Belgium. Seems like a pretty normal business deal, right?
Well, not so fast. Here was the problem. The company's object clause, its entire stated purpose in the MOA, was super specific. It was to make and sell railway carriages and wagons. So the question for the court was pretty simple. Does financing the construction of a railway fall under the umbrella of making and selling carriages? The House of Lords came down with a landmark ruling. The contract was ultra-virus. It was void from the get-go. And here is the real kicker. They ruled that not even the unanimous approval of every single shareholder could make it valid. An ultra-virus act is a legal nothing, a zero. You can't ratify it, you can't fix it, it simply never was. Now that seems pretty harsh on the outsider, Rich, who just lost a major deal. So how does the law balance protecting the company from itself while also protecting innocent outsiders who are just trying to do business with it? Well, it uses two competing ideas that create this kind of legal tug-of-war. On one side, you've got the doctrine of constructive notice. This is all about protecting the company. It basically says, hey, the MOA and AOA are public documents, so anyone dealing with the company is presumed to have read them and should know the company's limits. But to balance that out, we have the doctrine of indoor management. This one protects the outsider. It says that while outsiders have to know the public rules, they aren't expected to be detectives and know about all the company's private internal procedures. They can assume everything was done correctly behind closed doors. So, does this mean these foundational documents are set in stone forever and ever? Not at all. A company's constitution can absolutely be amended, but as you'd probably guess, it requires a very strict and very formal legal process. You can't just scribble in the margins. If you want to change the internal rulebook, the articles, you need to pass what's called a special resolution, which means getting a supermajority of the shareholders to agree. And any change has to be made in good faith for the benefit of the whole company. But it's a powerful tool. You can even use this process to change a company's entire status from private to public. But changing the master blueprint, the memorandum, oh, that's an even bigger deal. Changing something fundamental, like the company's legal name or moving its main office to a different state, is a major undertaking. It often requires not just the shareholders' approval, but also getting the green light from the central government. It just goes to show you how truly foundational that document is. So when you boil it all down, it comes to this. These two documents are the legal DNA of a company. They define its purpose, its power, and its limits. Which leaves us with one final thought. The next time you think about investing in, partnering with, or even lending money to a company, have you read its constitution?